Hi YouTube! In today's video we're going to be discussing 1970s fashion. I'll be telling you a bit about how and why they dressed the way they did in the 70s, how you can identify it when you're out in the wild, and wear those styles now if you like this. So I hope this is useful and that you enjoy this video. Shapes and styles. So in the early 70s, there was a lot of late 60s. As it happens at the beginning of an era, we're still looking a little bit at the end of the era before. They're always quite seamless, merging into each other. And those 60s carry-ons that we were getting were those arty influences and things like the prints and those psychedelic prints and patterns that we were seeing in clothing. The hippie style, which started late 60s and carried on 70s. Bohemian mixed with Victorian elements, which formed a kind of country pioneer vibe. This resulted in loose Victorian style blouses and shirts with high necks, yokes, and a yoke, I don't mean an egg yolk, a yoke is like on a shirt. There'll be a picture there. Lots of ruffles, plenty of ruffles and frills. Peasant blouses with big puffy sleeves, long floaty skirts and stuff like clogs as well. The Good Life was a British sitcom which influenced many people to get into gardening. So the program was about people that were growing their own produce. This added to that country, natural, naturey vibe of the era. Also adding into that vibe was Little House on the Prairie, which was an American show that championed the Americana side of that country boho-y pioneer stuff. In general, people were playing more with fashion, having more fun, expressing themselves more, even more than the era before, if you can imagine. I know the 60s was a lot of fun. 70s was too. People were dressing up. There were less rules and boundaries in fashion. The women's liberation movement loosened the structure of the undergarments and women's wear in general. So a general freedom of movement and feeling in this era. The gay liberation movement led to gender-bending styles. People felt free to express themselves and their androgynous style. And it was becoming more common with everybody experimenting more with their identities and how they showed that through fashion and their style. Hair was long and natural and shaggy. Everyone was wearing similar shapes and styles, and many clothes were sold unisex for all ages. Shape-wise, we were getting lengths to the extreme. We're talking maxi skirts, maxi dresses, and hot pants so short they could be mistaken for a belt. Clothing flared out and moved, made for dancing, which was done a lot in this era. Collars were big, and those collared shirts poked out over large lapels as well. Everything was just large and more so. The waist of this era tended to be a high waist, so that was a high-waisted trouser and a high-waisted skirt, and men too were wearing a high waist as well and tucking in. We were pairing this with waistcoats. There were plenty of waistcoats, whether that was knitted, a nice velvet one, a fluffy one, a suit one. There were plenty of them. And suits in general were being worn a lot, not just for workwear, but for fun, for dancing at discos. Workwear staples like the shirt and the tie were being worn loads, but we're seeing them in less formal ways. We're seeing the shirts being fun and dramatic and not just those typical shirting colours. We're seeing fun and funky shirts and fun and funky suits in interesting 70s fabrics. Heels were big and chunky as well. Platforms loomed and everyone again wore them, and they were as fun and funky as the outfits as well. Accessory wise, there were a lot of scarves tied around the neck, around the head. Think of Scooby-Doo, so a lot of people wearing those little tie scarves. Big jewellery in lots of fun colours, again to match the outfits, and interesting psychedelic-y shapes, big circles and that kind of thing. Lots of bangles that clattered around when you dance. Layered beads, so lots of them in those bright fun colours. big rings, big everything. Hat-wise, again, hats weren't spared. You're getting really big floppy brims in your hats. Knitted hats, there was a lot of knit in fabric, in accessories, like little knitted waistcoats, little knitted hot pants, little knitted everything, little knitted hats. You're also getting the baker boy style of hat, so a cap with that little cappy brim, and then it's got a little puff. It's a little puffy train worker style hat. That style was popular. Makeup of the era was kind of more natural. The clothes were fun enough as they were, so we weren't getting those 60s pop makeup. That had had its time. This was a bit more pared back. Style icons. Music and film are always big influences on fashion. They just go hand in hand. This era had many big influencers. Farrah Fawcett, who starred in Charlie's Angels, became a massive icon, and her Fawcett flick hairstyle influenced the hair of the era. People trying to flick out their hair in a similar way, and Farrah Fawcett definitely championed this style and had many people doing it. Charlie's Angels in general showed women in a stronger light than they have been shown before. In comfortable outfits like jeans, yes, they're still flared and bell-bottom, but jeans that they can fight in but still look edgy and feminine and sexy and all that at the same time. There were more TV shows than ever with strong female leads, fighting crime detectives and that kind of thing. In the teen world, it was Donny Osmond versus David Cassidy. You liked one or the other, you didn't like both. Donny was a sweet baby-faced singer, part of the Osmonds, a family of singers. Donny also sang with his sister, but himself, he was a big icon. A lot of his stage outfits were inspired by Elvis. I'm sure many people were inspired by Elvis with their stage outfits, those fun jumpsuits, big 70s thing as well. Men and women enjoyed jumpsuits. David was a TV star who became a singer in later life, and his style was more casual and perhaps grungy than Donny. Anyway, Cher with her partner Sonny. I'm sure you've heard of the Sonny and Cher combo before. Cher was a big deal on her own, and she wore many bedazzled outfits to perform in, designed by the designer Bob Mackie. And those outfits had many cutouts showing her toned body. She wasn't afraid to get it all out, and she had really, really long, beautiful, swishy hair. Just stunning. Look at her outfits if you ever just want inspiration. Bianca Jagger was the partner of Mick Jagger. Yes, Mick Jagger was a big style icon in his own right, but also Bianca was. She rocked a suit. She looked fantastic in suits. She was a big champion of disco glamour. You're always seeing her in a nightclub wearing something really cool. Speaking of nightclubs, Studio 54 was a nightclub in Manhattan that had been around since the 20s. But after a lot of drama, the club reopened in 77 and welcomed droves of celebrities, which of course meant lots of press coverage for the club. The club was massive. If you didn't go, you weren't cool, and it really made the disco style of fashion become even bigger. The club regulars included all sorts of massive celebrities, from Andy Warhol, Michael Jackson, the Jaggers, of course, Liza Minnelli, Grace Jones, and even Sylvester Stallone. Everyone who was someone went to this club. Fashion designers like Calvin Klein and Holstein became known for dressing the guests of this club in disco-inspired fashion. There was even a special launch for the film Grease that came out in 1978, which featured Olivia Newton-John, and it featured John Travolta. The film was a throwback to the 50s, but made in the 70s, so you can still see 70s doing 50s if you watch that film. And John Travolta himself went on to film Saturday Night Fever, which championed the disco fever that was massive of this era. He just propelled it even more so. We're also starting to get more styles of music, like punk and glam rock. They were born in this time and of course had massive influence on fashion that we still have today. The punks were rebelling against the establishment and all of the excess and the materialism of the era, which, if you hear what I mentioned earlier, the bigness, the frills, all of the glitter, all of the expense and dripping of luxury that the disco brung, the punk was rebelling against all of that. So they took clothing and they ripped it up and they damaged it and they reattached it with safety pins. They were looking at tartans and darker shades and destroying it, creating a DIY aesthetic, a lot less perfect than what we were seeing in other regular styles. Adding accessories like studs and fishnets with t-shirts that were continuing to rebel against the establishment. The hair was big, bright, spikes and shaved styles and gel. And seeing a punk in the 70s was scary. I know nowadays we are so used to this genre, you might just think it's a bit cool, but they really meant something back then in the 70s. Vivienne Westwood rocketed this style into the mainstream though, and her store that she worked on with Malcolm McLaren from the Sex Pistols, they then made a shop named Sex, sold many offensive t-shirts and just really added into this style so everybody could get their hands on this style that maybe, you know, people were just doing at home, make do amend, but now they could actually go out and buy things that already look that way. And of course, Vivienne Westwood took all these tartans and things like that and continued with that anarchy in her designs for many, many years. Big musical influences of this genre were The Clash, Buzzcocks, Ramones, artists like Patti Smith, and punk still lives on today. If you're interested in this style, you can think it's really cool and not want to hate the establishment or do anything to the Queen, but that was where it started from and that's what its roots were. Glam rock, in my opinion, is a marriage of maybe some of those disco elements and some of that punkiness. It was extreme and the outfits were very stage. Full-on camp, full-on androgyny. Glam rock maybe isn't so big today, but still has influences on fashion and disco wear and party wear. Big influences from this were T-Rex, Slade, New York Dolls, and plenty of big soloists like David Bowie, Elton John, Rod Stewart and Iggy Pop, to name a few. Heels loomed massive again in this genre, and there was plenty of glitter and bright colours in glam rock. This was a style probably seen more in music and on stage than seeing someone who looked glam rock walking the streets. Queen started off very glam rock with Freddie Mercury, the frontman, wearing many tight artsy jumpsuits that were bold like his personality and his tremendous vocals. ABBA also dressed up a lot for their performances in a coordinated way. They all took it on with plenty of drama, plenty of fun, massive fashion. Okay, how can we wear this today? We have gone through what this style looks like and all the different ways it could be expressed. Nowadays, I don't think you would be hard pressed to find a way of wearing 70s inspired fashion. From buying it in the high street, you can definitely find 70s inspired clothing styles that still live on today. You can find many a store that is making really 70s inspired niche clothing that doesn't look like a costume, it's just a love letter to that era. If you don't want to go to a specialist store, then some of the things to look out for, the key things to look out for. In the summer, 70s bohemia could be the hot pants, might be a little knitted crop top perhaps. And in the winter, you wouldn't be hard pressed to find the disco style. Disco style does tend to come around for party wear quite often. Sort of the glitter, the metallic, the big furs, maybe like a toned down version of glam rock perhaps. Bohemian wise also in the fall, autumn time, you will get plenty of those shirts with a big sleeve, maybe a tie neck, a yoke, those Victoriana, Bohemian-y blouses, you'll probably be able to find them. Flares are back, not just for the summer, for the winter. There are plenty of kind of flared leggings at the moment, so you can just pull them on. Right now there's plenty of velvet ones because velvet is a big winter thing. Lots of jumpsuits in the same way, plenty of maxi dresses, plenty of jeans in a flare as well. There are a lot of flares. Great if you want to add more volume into your body on the bottom half. In the noughties, there was definitely a 70s resurgence. They were inspired by the 70s at that point, and we wore a lot of flares in the noughties. But in the noughties, the flares were low waist instead of high waist. So in the 70s, they mainly wore high waisted. So if you really want to be true to that era, or if you prefer a high waist for your body shape, for your style, then that's more of a 70s thing. If you're doing noughties doing 70s, it's a low waist. So you can find both options at the moment because the noughties is so big. You'll be able to find a low-waisted version, or you can find a typical 70s high-waisted version too. In autumn, you will be able to find a lot of the corduroy and the bohemian fabrics, and 70s tended to have quite an autumn color palette. They liked those mustards, the oranges, the browns, the deep purples, the khakis, quite a lot in the 70s. And at autumn time, the autumn palette is in the shops more often. So it may just be a colour palette is your nod to that era. Maybe it's a brown suede, maybe it's the fluff. Maybe you want to just pick the accessories of the era, a baker boy hat, tie a scarf around your neck, wear a platform. If you're not comfortable with the flares and the big sleeves and the big collars, if that's all a bit too overwhelming for you. As always, resale is huge at the moment, and vintage is huge, which is great for our environment. A great way also to fall back in love with history, express yourself in ways you may not be able to do with modern clothing. So if you're someone that enjoys vintage shopping, you can have a look for 70s things. In a good vintage shop, they'll put the year on the label so you can know it's legit. They do tend to be a bit more expensive because, of course, the further you go back, the more value it has, but you can find some really lovely 70s pieces. But to own a piece of history is, of course, very special. Or you might find someone that come from the 70s, has kept their 70s things. Hopefully they're in good condition. They perhaps don't want to wear them anymore, but they might donate them to you. Lucky, lucky. As I say with other videos, in the 70s, they were still making their own clothing via patterns. The past was so much more craftier than perhaps we are today, with high street being so affordable and us having more money and that kind of thing. But if you're a bit crafty and you want to take on a project, then you're sure to find some really lovely 70s patterns that hopefully aren't too expensive, and then you can actually make it to your measurements and customize it and do your own merge of maybe modern fabrics but in 70s styles and shapes. That will make it really your own and really unique. But as always, I will link to some brands that do 70s inspired clothing if you want to just hit a button and buy something that someone has designed in a 70s way. Hopefully this makes the era feel a little clearer, if not for the research and what I've said, then the pictures. I hope this has painted a picture of this era in fashion, and I hope that if this feels like you, that it sparked something in you, then great. As I mentioned before, I offer a service called Style Personality. It's an hour, it's online. We discuss your style identity, and it may be that 70s, a little touch of 70s is what you need to find yourself, to find how you express yourself through clothing. Maybe 70s fashion works really well for your body shape and you love how it makes you feel. Maybe that disco movement is actually what was lurking there inside and needed to come out. Maybe even the punk style is you. Maybe you're a bit alternative and maybe you need to find that confidence to express yourself. We'll talk about it, we'll chat, and we'll help you find ways to express your personality and your taste and make it work for you. Make it work for your budget. Find you those brands that do it the way you like it. So get in touch if you're interested in that. But yeah, anyway, enough self-promotion. I hope you enjoyed this. Have a good day. Goodbye.